Hello, everyone. Welcome to our little webinar today. We're going to be talking about the effects of abusive people on children. This is a hard topic for anyone, so we want everyone to keep in mind self-care is our top priority, whatever that means for you, whether you need to step away from the computer for a bit, go get water, fidget, whatever that may be. The other thing that we really want to emphasize with this presentation in particular is that there are a lot of um, emotions around this, as there are with the topics that we've had previously, but we wouldn't just emphasize that we don't want people to feel guilt or shame. No one asked to be abused, and no one asked to have their children exposed to abuse. So whether it's patients that we're talking to, people in the community, or our own personal experiences, we just want to push guilt and shame away as much as possible. So I'm going to be one of your presenters today. My name is Victor. I'm a community educator at Family Violence Project, and my colleague Michelle is my co-presenter. If you want to introduce yourself, Michelle.
Yes, I'm Michelle, an advocate and educator as well at Family Violence Project.
All right. So we're going to jump into it. If there's anything that folks want to add in, we are asking people to keep their cameras off just for the recording purposes, but feel free to unmute your mics or pop something in the chat and we'll keep an eye on it. But we're going to get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much all for joining and taking time out of your day. So we are the I also want to make a note of the title of this. So the title of the presentation is Effects of Abusive People on Children. It sounds like a wordy title, but that is to keep in mind that, there is an abuser who is in charge of this, who's causing these effects on children. So it's a wordy title, but, language matters. And so just keeping that in mind as well. And so when we're talking about, how this is all affecting children, I think the common belief is like, oh, well, they're in bed. They may not be able to hear things or they don't know what's going on. But children are much more aware than we think. Kids are very smart. They're little sponges. And they're really a lot more aware than we realize. Even young children, babies, they may not know what's going on, but they can feel the feelings of like, unrest or, a lack of ease, a lack of trust, a lack of, just when things are happening, when people are fighting, when their caregiver isn't safe, like it's amazing. But babies, little kids, people know, kids, little ones know that that's happening. They may not know what's happening, but they know that something's not right. So it's important to keep that in mind as we're talking about this. Oftentimes people are like, nope, they don't know, but we've learned that kids, little ones, infants even know more than we think they know. So with talking about that, we also know that, children living with an abusive person, they may see the abuse, they may hear abuse, they may notice the next morning, things are off, things are different. They may be told what's happened, or maybe in the room when someone's talking about it, so they're taking it in that way. They may be forced or coerced into participating. And this is a really awful position that abusers put children in. There's a really powerful film that I recently watched, and I can put that information in the chat. Timekeeper. It was done in the UK, but it really shows the impact of, when the abuser is coercing the child into taking part in the abuse. And that's not a choice any kid generally wants to make, but they may feel like they don't have a choice. And often the non-offending parent, just wants to create ease for that child. So they don't blame the child, but and they feel a lot of guilt over what's happening also because they know the child doesn't want to do that. We know that they may directly experience harm, injury, or abuse themselves. And this could be because of intervening. Maybe they see their parents fighting and they get in the middle of it and experience harm that way. Maybe it's a child in the non offending parent's arms and the abuser is going towards that parent and the child gets hurt that way. We know all of these things can happen, unfortunately. And often what we hear too is that kids feel like they might have to choose a side for their safety, which is an awful position to put a child in as well. They may know, like, well, I want to side with this parent because what's happening to them is wrong. But if I say anything, it's gonna make it worse. So I'm gonna side with this parent, this other offending parent, because it's gonna be safest. And for a kid to have to be in that position, it's not fair to them. Oftentimes the non-offending parent sees what's happening and, again, feels a lot of shame that their child's going through that. This affects kids in many ways, unfortunately.
So we want to come back to the power and control wheel. We've talked about this in our first webinar in December, and anyone who's familiar with this work has seen this a multitude of times. The power and control wheel, power and control is at the center because that's what allows the violence, whether it's physical, sexual, or otherwise, on the outside of the wheel to happen. And how power and control is curated and held is through any number of tactics used together, and those tactics are represented by the spokes on this wheel. And you'll notice that using children, which is in like the bottom left sort of this wheel, is a tactic in and of itself. It's extremely common for abusive people to use children, either harm them directly, make threats, coerce them into the violence, in order to control the non-abusive parent, or individual in the relationship. The reason that we want to talk about this is not only the effects on the kid, but also, we've already mentioned guilt and shame. People aren't choosing to expose their children to abusive people. The way that abusive people may act towards the children makes it unsafe to try and get away from it at times. And there are other things that are happening. It's not just that the children might be threatened, but the non-abusive parent might not have the financial resources to leave, might have been isolated, and is just scared. So you really want to emphasize that this is a really, really big part of power and control. And it's not a choice to live with it. And so as part of that tactic, we want to talk about what that might manifest and look like. Undermining the non-abusive parents' relationship with their children is a surefire way to reduce people's safety and control them. So it might be making them feel guilty about their children, if they're acting out as a result of trauma, like it's your fault that these things have to happen. Forcing them to parent in a way other than they would want to parent. One big example of that is a kid has done something. The non-abusive parent knows that the abusive parent's punishment is going to be totally out of proportion to what happens, so they punish the child themselves. And they may not want to spank the child, but they know that if they don't, the punishment they're going to receive is going to be even worse. They might use the child to relay messages, use visitations to harass the non-offending parent, threatening to take the child away, most certainly in relationships, after relationships, threatening with CPS, with courts, etc. Turning the children against them might use the non-abusive parent's mental health. Your parent's crazy. This wouldn't happen if your parent took their meds, something to that effect. And again, forcing or coercing the child to take part in the abuse, whether that's degrading the parents or otherwise being some part of that power and control system.
So we've talked about a lot of these things, how they can negatively impact a child, witnessing a parent use power and control over the other, experiencing abuse themselves. We also see, when people are making moves to be safe, if someone is leaving their partner to, try to create safety for themselves and their child, that also can negatively impact a child to have to like move to a new place. They may lose family and friends, and those can have negative impacts as well. And we just say this because people might say, like, well, they're gone now, everything should be better. But no, they may still experience abuse, as we talked about in the first session. Just because people are leaving abusers doesn't mean the abuse stops, but also that moving can create more trauma as well, just because of those losses, because of the hardship of moving. And it's not to say that people don't or shouldn't, but just recognizing recognizing that those have impacts also. We also want to say that children are resilient, and there are many things that can help support kids and support their healing, support, decrease the trauma and the effects of trauma on children. Having that strong bond with a non-offending parent is huge, and also like having other strong healthy adult relationships, so that can be with an aunt, an uncle, an older cousin, extended family, teacher, grandparents, scout leader, the people in the community. We say it takes a village to raise a child, right? It's even more so when people are experiencing abuse and other traumas at home. So having those strong healthy relationships really makes a difference. So if you know of someone who's experiencing this, to be able to reach out and support them is so, so helpful. Having routines, predictability, you know, um, talking about their strengths, their accomplishments, recognizing those things to really build them up is really important at this age. And when kids are going through this, a lot of times kids internalize the things that they've heard or the things that they've seen, and can make the story about themselves when that's not the case. And so to be able to talk about that in an age appropriate level is really, really important too. So having that accurate age appropriate information, not just brushing it under the rug, because we know that pretending it's not happening doesn't make it go away, right? So being able to talk at an age appropriate level with kids is really important. I'm really encouraging them to identify and express feelings. Like, we don't give kids a lot of feeling words, especially boys, unfortunately. We don't, if we don't give kids the words to understand what their feelings are and how to express them in a healthy way, it's really setting them up for not being able to do those things. So, supporting them and identifying those and validating those feelings, even if they may not make sense, maybe they might be feeling really sad to not have that abusive parent in their life and may feel guilt about that. But no, whatever their feelings are okay. Or they might hate that parent, and that's okay too. Like, whatever their feelings are okay. And so being able to validate those and support them in healthy ways of dealing with those. And then a sense of physical and emotional safety. Like, that is so important for kids to have that. And we know so many parents who are experiencing abuse will safety plan with their child to help support that. That's really important to do. And so you may hear of behavioral things that are happening. There's so many, it's too many to list, and it's individual to people. But sometimes with infants or infants, you may hear about them having nightmares. As they're getting older, you may hear about bedwetting, regression from, if they hadn't been bedwetting anymore, maybe they're starting to again, or regression with language. And those could be impacts from, witnessing abuse, seeing abuse, being there when it's happening. As kids get older, sometimes they're diagnosed with ADHD because of the, not being able to pay attention, fidgeting, having a lot of energy. And it may be because of trauma. And when what happens is they can sometimes get diagnosed, but then the medication doesn't work. So then it's increased when, these are actually things that they're trauma symptoms. They can really mirror those symptoms sometimes. So when we hear of kids, having behaviors, instead of saying what's wrong with you, to really go to what happened, what's happening that's causing these behaviors, and really being present with kids, and not, instead of getting mad at them, being like, what's happening? What's behind this, and having that compassion and that space for them to be able to talk about and process what's happening, and then supporting them through that. Because, we know that there's a lot more that we don't know. So being present with kids and supportive is really important.
So we want to circle back to one of the points that was made 2 slides ago that's really, really important for us as advocates and for everyone who is supporting people who are dealing with abuse in their lives. And that is that supporting a child's attachment and relationships with non-abusive parents and caregivers is tantamount. It's the single most important resource for children's healthy growth and development. Children need stability, and they need dependability. They're growing. The world is already scary when you don't know what it is. And to have to deal with the effects of an abusive person on top of that, it's challenging for anyone, and it's certainly challenging for kids. How do you support those attachments? Well, there are a myriad of ways to do it that really sort of depend on what our roles in. Some folks here might be care providers, you might be just community members. Um, but no matter who we are, here are some things that we can do to support survivors and their children. Um, Understand that survivors are the experts of their situation. They are the ones living their lives. We don't want to put our suggestions or our sort of interpretation of the situation on them and really understand what they're asking for because they know what they need. We talked about how trauma might manifest itself behavioral wise in children. There might be a child who is deeply traumatized and is a straight A student. And if a survivor has concern about that child, it's important for us to listen to them and their concerns rather than just um, pass judgment. So listen and validate. Especially for those of us who work in a care field, you might be the first person that a survivor is talking to about this, and it's so important that we really take in what they're saying and validate their experiences and their emotions. Just like with kids, they might be experiencing a broad range of emotions, scared about the situation, but happy that they left, or missing the abusive partner, but also really hopeful for the future. Withholding judgment, of course, is extremely important. Provide resources on the effects of trauma on children. Now, we don't expect any of you to be experts on this situation, on trauma in children, but if your workplace has a resource guide, if you know some good websites, certainly share those among your colleagues and community members and just be able to direct folks there. Um, Help parents have an age-appropriate conversation with children about what happens. That can also look like directing to resources. And of course, refer survivors to us. We have a 24-hour helpline. We have other services, but we are here for folks. And we'll talk a little bit about how we are here for folks.
Yeah, and we did include with this webinar a handout on trauma in children, and I'll also put a link in the chat from Futures Without Violence. And if you want to Google it too, they have Everyday Magic, 16 ways adults can support children exposed to violence and trauma. And I'll put that link as well. So our services, we provide a 24-hour helpline. We're here for folks to access. So after this webinar, after watching this, if you want to talk more, whether you're experiencing abuse, you're worried about a family member, a friend, or something has happened in the past that you want to process, or you just have questions, we're here for people 24 hours a day. So you can call our helpline number. We have emergency shelter in Kennebec and Somerset Counties. We have court advocates who support people with getting protection from abuse orders, if that's something that they want to do that they think would be helpful for them. Because as we know with safety plans, some things are helpful for some folks and some, they know that their partners will not respond to that. So if that's something that people want to do, we're here to support them. We have a liaison to Child Protective Services. As we're talking about kids, this is a really important one because that's a huge fear people have with calling the police or reaching out. They're really scared that Child Protective is going to get involved or take their children. And so we have an advocate who's here that works directly with Child Protective. So I feel like they're an interpreter. They work with the survivor and support them with understanding what DHHS is doing. And they also work with those CPS workers to explain why survivors might be doing what they're doing also. Because some things, as Victor said, some things that parents may do, they may not understand that those things are for safety. Like, maybe they're contacting the abuser before a visit to make sure, just to see what their mood they're in so that they can, support the kids in being safe during that visit. So there may be all kinds of things going on, and that CPS liaison is a really huge help. We have individual advocacy, we have support and education groups, we provide supportive housing and services for folks. We do school-based educations, with the little ones talking about hands are not for hitting, all the way up to high school and talking about relationships and rights and responsibilities in a relationship. We do specialized training like this, and we have a certified domestic violence intervention classes for people who are abusive or using these abusive behaviors in their relationship, and want to change, because we know when people are using those, it doesn't benefit them long term either. They may be getting their needs met in that moment, but relationships based on fear and violence don't work out for anyone. So we're here for folks in all those capacities. And all of our survivor services are free and confidential. So we're here for folks. We that we're confidential other than when we have to do a mandated report, but we talk through people through that process with folks to be as safe as possible, because we know that can create danger too sometimes. So we work with folks as much as we can to help create that safety plan around reporting. And do folks have any questions in the chat? Anything anyone wants to add or has thought of? You can feel free to unmute. I think we made it too compact. We're so fast today.
Stop there.
And anyone have any other thoughts?
If you want to hold your questions until after the recording's done, that's okay too.
Thank you both, Michelle and Victor, for taking the time to do this today. Michelle did put a link to an evaluation in the chat. If those who are on the webinar could just take a couple moments to fill that out. It's obviously helpful for our presenters, but it is helpful for us at Redington as well to plan future classes. Thank you both again, and we will we'll take this recording and put it on YouTube. So please feel free to share it with your contacts, your loved ones. Please help us spread the word about domestic violence education, and we will be having more of these every month. And so if you want to sign up for any future classes, please reach out.